Men in Black isn't just a movie, it's a dramatization of real life experiences. Follow me down the rabbit hole to learn more. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about the Men in Black. We are diving deep into the original accounts, the key witnesses like Harold Dahl, Albert Bender, and others, and dissecting the unsettling characteristics that define the real Men in Black. What terrifying truth are they trying to keep hidden? Thank you, Sophie, John, Keano, and Nathan, for requesting this episode. And of course, thank you to our sponsors, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring this podcast. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now. Let's go back to the Maury Island UFO incident of 1947, where the first recorded figure matching the Men in Black description appeared. On June 21st, 1947, a Marine patrolman, Harold Dahl, and his son Charles were gathering logs near the eastern shore of Maury Island, Washington, while on a conservation mission. The incident occurred in what would later become known as the Summer of the Saucers, a period that saw unprecedented public attention for unidentified flying objects following Kenneth Arnold's famous Mount Rainier sighting just 3 days after this Harold Dahl sighting. According to Dahl, he saw 6 donut-shaped objects hovering in the air, roughly half a mile above his boat. He says before he could make sense of what he saw, one of the objects fell from the sky, raining metallic debris, and some even struck his son Charles. The event was so big that the falling material killed Dahl's dog, and his son required medical attention for his burns. Dahl took several photographs of flying objects and later showed them to his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. Chrisman was skeptical until he went back to the site the next morning and saw one of the flying discs still hovering in the air. The next morning, on June 22nd, Dahl says he was visited by a man in a black suit who described the experience in eerily accurate detail. The man told Dahl, quote, "What I have said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe," end quote. Just before leaving, the man in black warned him that, quote, "bad things would happen to him if he ever spoke of the incident." This encounter established the narrative for thousands of other Men in Black reports, depicted as intimate knowledge of private experiences, vague governmental authority, and veiled threats demanding silence. Dahl and his supervisor Chrisman had already contacted local authorities and the press, which then contacted Raymond A. Palmer, the editor of the science fiction magazine Amazing Stories. Meanwhile, Palmer had already been in touch with Kenneth Arnold, who said he had seen 9 UFOs near Mount Rainier. Palmer wired money to Arnold and enlisted him to investigate the Maury Island story. While Arnold was investigating in Tacoma, he decided to contact Lieutenant Frank Brown of Military Intelligence, 4th Air Force, who was one of his friends. Brown, along with Captain William L. Davidson, was one of the 2 Air Force intelligence officers sent to interview Dahl and Chrisman and inspect the alleged debris. However, the Army Air Force officers were both killed when their B-25 bomber carrying samples of the alleged debris crashed on August 1st, 1947. The crash itself became a mystery, with the Kentucky New Era reporting the headline, quote, "Flying disc investigators die in Army bomber wreck," end quote. On the same day of the crash, Dahl publicly claimed the sighting was a hoax. Maybe this was because of the warning given to him by the Men in Black, stating that something bad would happen if he spoke about the incident. However, special agents of the FBI investigated the deaths of Davidson and Brown, ultimately concluding that Dahl did not recant his story, but that his claim of a hoax was itself a fabrication to avoid further public attention. FBI Special Agent Jack Wilcox conducted a 16-day investigation in September of 1947, documenting his findings in extensive reports that would remain sealed for 50 years. The FBI files revealed that Dahl stated, quote, "If questioned by the authorities, he was going to say it was a hoax because he did not want any further trouble over the matter," end quote. The Secretary of the Senate, Hunter G. Goodman, swore on April 18, 2017, on the validity of the FBI record. The Washington State Senate passed Resolution 8648 in 2017, formally acknowledging the 70th anniversary of this pivotal event and recognizing the heroism of the 2 intelligence officers who lost their lives. Quick note here, on July 8th, 1947, just 2 weeks after the Washington sightings, the most well-known UFO event in history was made public in Roswell, New Mexico. On a ranch near Corona, New Mexico, a ranch foreman discovered unusual wreckage consisting of material like tinfoil, rubber strips, paper, and thin wooden sticks scattered across his property. After the local sheriff was notified, personnel from the Roswell Army Airfield, RAAF, collected the debris. On July 8th, 1947, the RAAF issued a press release claiming that they had captured a, quote, flying disc. This announcement quickly became an international headline. Within a day, the military, of course, quickly reversed its statement, and during a press conference, officials displayed the material that was found and claimed it was just this weather balloon with a radar reflector. The Roswell incident never had public claims of Men in Black at the time. However, in 1978, retired Air Force officer Jesse Marcel revealed that the Army's weather balloon claim was a cover story and that the debris was of extraterrestrial origin. I actually did an entire episode on the Roswell event. I've done actually multiple episodes on UFO encounters. If you want to go back and look at those, I will link that in the show notes. But this next guy played a pivotal role in transforming the Men in Black from an isolated 1947 sighting into a global phenomenon. As the founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, IFSB, in 1952, Albert K. Bender was a dedicated UFO enthusiast whose attempts to uncover the truth about flying discs abruptly ended about a year later. Bender, a factory worker from Bridgeport, Connecticut, lived in what locals called a chamber of horrors, decorating his attic with 20 chiming clocks and horror movie scenes. His home on Broad Street became the headquarters for the IFSB, which by 1953 had grown to 600 members worldwide, including honorary member Eddie Rickenbacker, the World War I flying ace and CEO of Eastern Airlines. Albert Einstein actually declined an invitation to join the IFSB, as well as an invitation to serve as president of Israel around that same time, which I thought was a really weird thing that they would offer. Anyway, the Bureau published a quarterly newsletter called Space Review, which combined empirical collection of UFO sighting data with exploratory efforts in telepathic communication, including organized group mental projections aimed at extraterrestrial contact. On March 15th, 1953, Bender coordinated World Contact Day, synchronizing global telepathic outreach from hundreds of participants worldwide. But Bender's ambitious investigations came to an abrupt and disturbing halt. Bender claimed that in July of 1953, he was visited in his Bridgeport, Connecticut home by three men in black suits who identified themselves as from a quote-unquote higher authority, issued telepathic warnings, and displayed an unnerving knowledge of his research, ordering him to cease his investigations immediately. The visit left Bender so physically and mentally shaken that he quickly obeyed, publishing a cryptic final edition of his magazine in October of 1953 that stated, quote, "The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but orders are withholding any information about this from a higher source. We advise those engaged in saucer work to be very cautious," end quote. This mysterious encounter, which he later detailed in his 1962 book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, solidified the image of the Men in Black as menacing, authoritative agents who silenced witnesses, thereby firmly establishing them as a core feature of the conspiracy theories surrounding unidentifying flying objects. Which actually, this encounter with the Men in Black makes me wonder if his telepathic energy and coordinating the World Contact Day was actually working. In his book, published by Gray Barker's Saucerman Press, Bender described how these figures wore clothing resembling clergy attire, wore Homburg-style hats, appeared to float above the floor, emitted paralyzing energy, and left behind a yellow mist with a sulfur smell. He reported feeling transported and becoming so ill after the encounter that he didn't eat for 3 days. These beings allegedly revealed themselves as extraterrestrials and warned that their human appearance was merely an illusion, which is a theme that we will see come up over and over. The November 29th, 1953 edition of the Bridgeport Sunday Herald reported the story under the headline, quote, Mystery Visitors Halt Research, quoting Bender that three men in dark suits flashed credentials showing them to be representatives of a higher authority and asked numerous questions about the IFSB. Reporter Lem McCollum interpreted these visitors as government officials. However, Bender would later clarify that the MIB were not of Earth, fundamentally shifting the narrative from governmental suppression to supernatural or extraterrestrial intervention. A man who worked with Albert Bender, Gray Barker, was also a central figure in the Men in Black claim. Because remember, Albert Bender's book is published by Gray Barker. Although Harold Dahl made the first claim about the Men in Black, it was Gray Barker's 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, that connected the isolated Maury Island story to the broader UFO narrative. Barker detailed Bender's claims that the men in dark suits forced him to stop his research. He introduced the idea that a secret group, whether it was government agents or something extraterrestrial, was actively silencing those who got too close to the truth. It was Barker's book that effectively coined the phrase Men in Black and established their iconic role as sinister agents of suppression in pop culture. Published by University Books of New York City in April of 1956, the work briefly made bestseller lists, and according to conspiracism scholar Michael Barkin, quote, quickly became a staple of UFO folklore, end quote. The book began with Barker's 1952 investigation of the Flatwoods Monster and his subsequent investigations in Brush Creek, California, before dedicating his correspondence with Bender and his involvement with the IFSB. However, Barker is thought to have greatly embellished many accounts. His associate, James W. Mosley, later revealed that Barker fabricated or significantly embellished several Men in Black accounts to dramatize his narrative and boost book sales. In the late 1960s, Sherwood and Barker collaborated on a brief fictional notice about the Men in Black, which was published as fact in Raymond A. Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine. Writing under the name Dr. Richard H. Pratt, Sherwood claimed he was ordered to silence by the black men after learning that UFOs were time-traveling vehicles. To be clear, just a note, by saying black men, he wasn't referring to their skin color. He was just referring to the way they looked, like Men in Black. They were dressed in black, so he just called them the black men. Barker later wrote to Sherwood, quote, evidently the fans swallowed this one with a gulp, end quote. Despite these admissions of hoaxing, Barker's influence on UFO culture proved immeasurable. He went on to orchestrate other notable hoaxes, including the infamous R.E. Straith letter in 1957, carried out with James Mosley, using State Department letterhead to write to contactee George Adamski, claiming that department members had evidence supporting Adamski's extraterrestrial experiences. The Lost Creek saucer sighting in July 1966 was another Barker production, featuring footage of a ceramic bogey saucer held on a fishing pole. Yet, despite his role as what one observer called, quote, a collector of tales, rumors, reports, dreams, and lies, Barker's work profoundly shaped how Men in Black would be portrayed in media for decades to come, influencing shows like Star Trek, The X-Files, Twin Peaks, The Outer Limits, and eventually inspiring the Men in Black comic series and film franchise. In 1955, just a year before Barker's book was published, another incident was recorded. Although it isn't directly linked to Men in Black, it adds more credible witness accounts to intimidation and a coordinated effort by military or government figures silencing a mysterious story. The Hopkinsville Goblins were a pivotal precursor to the Men in Black phenomenon, occurring in August 1955 in the Kelly-Hopkinsville area of Kentucky. The core incident involved two families, the Suttons and the Taylors, who reported an ordeal where they were allegedly attacked for hours by approximately 12 to 15 small, seemingly non-human entities described as being about 3 to 4 feet tall, with large heads, thin limbs, and glowing silver-colored bodies. The Sutton farm was located in nearby Kelly, Kentucky. It was the home of Glennie Langford, her young children Lonnie, Carlton, and Mary, her older sons Elmer, who went by Lucky Sutton, and John Charlie, or J.C. Sutton. Lucky's wife, Vera, JC's wife, Arlene, and Arlene's brother. So, very, very busy house. On the evening of August 21st, 1955, Lucky Sutton was home with his family after his last stint with the traveling carnival. And his friends, Billy Ray Taylor and his wife, took the opportunity to just come over and hang out. Everyone missed everybody. They just wanted to spend a nice night together. It was a hot Sunday night, and at around 7 p.m., Billy Ray went to go get some water from the well in the backyard when he saw this large silver object smoothly, which is really important, traveling through the sky before it went over the house and then dropped silently to the ground somewhere in the distance, which would freak people out today, where we see things in the sky all the time, let alone in 1955, which planes were still flying back then, but this would freak people out. When he returned to the house, he told everyone what he saw, and they were like, dude, you're just like making this whole thing up. There's no way that this is what you saw. It's too weird. However, about an hour later, the dog began barking at the back door. Lucky and Billy Ray went to go see what was happening and were met with a glowing light hovering around a 3.5 foot tall creature that shimmered like metal with a, quote, oversized head, almost perfectly round, its arms extended almost to the ground, its hands had talons, and its oversized eyes glowed with a yellowish light, end quote. As the chaos escalated, Billy Ray and Lucky, armed with shotguns, guarded the house. The glowing figure approached the house, and the men shot at it. Instead of falling, the creature dramatically raised its arms and executed a flip before vanishing into the surrounding darkness, signaling the start of a wild battle. For the next several hours, the Sutton family and their guests say they were under attack by the unexplained creatures. While they hid inside, one of the beings pressed its face against the window, and even when struck by shotgun blasts that shredded the screen, it remained seemingly unharmed before flipping away and disappearing. Which, like, how crazy? You go to your friend's house, just like enjoy their company, and now you're in a firefight with aliens? This is a sci-fi movie. Glennie later recalled a, quote, terrifying moment of being overwhelmed by shock and falling backward while hiding in a hallway with Billy Ray, end quote, as she saw one of the approaching entities at the back door. She described the being in detail, stating it resembled, quote, a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. And it had textures like shimmering bright metal, like on my refrigerator, end quote. Billy Ray apparently stepped out onto the covered porch when a claw-like hand reached down from the roof overhang, attempting to grab his hair from above. As he screamed, he was pulled back inside, and Lucky ran outside and fired his gun repeatedly toward the roof. Multiple witnesses then reported seeing another small glowing creature leap down and retreat rapidly into the woods. When the coast was clear, the family ran to their cars and sped to the police station. Because remember, there's a lot of people living in this house, and they have visitors at this house. So it's not just like Lucky and Billy Ray, even though they were who was doing most of the fighting. They have kids, they have wives. A lot of people are living in this house. And they all just witnessed this alien firefight. The response was substantial. 4 police officers, including Chief Russell Greenwood, 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police officers from a nearby United States Army Fort Campbell, all drove to the Sutton farmhouse because, like, everyone wants to see what just happened. The police found evidence of a disturbance, including numerous shell casings, as the residents had fired weapons at the creatures, and unusual glowing patches in the woods, which seems like evidence that there are actually aliens there. The screen door was torn, and the home was riddled with bullet holes representing 4 boxes of spent ammunition. Chief Greenwell noted that one witness had a pulse of 140 beats per minute and observed, quote, these aren't the kind of people who would normally run to the police for help, end quote. The actual link to the Men in Black narrative came from the alleged aftermath, where the witnesses claimed they were subjected to intense pressure and intimidation by individuals they perceived to be military or government agents. These mysterious men reportedly attempted to coerce the witnesses into recanting their story, an act of government or quasi-government suppression and demand for silence. In the days following the incident, dozens of USO fanatics converged on the small farm, and the family became so sick of being harassed and having their integrity questioned that within 10 days, they literally moved away. But also, I bet they were probably pretty scared that they just saw a bunch of aliens on their property. So they're like, it's time to go. Glennie Langford was so traumatized that she sold the farmhouse and moved to an apartment in town where she felt safer because she was around other people. After the experience, her son J.C. Sutton couldn't hold down a job anymore. Like they were so traumatized by this situation. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer and UFO researcher highly regarded for his work with the U.S. Air Force, called the Kelly Hopkinsville case preposterous and offensive to common sense, despite the considerable physical evidence and multiple witnesses. Project Blue Book officially classified the case as a hoax, yet the granddaughter of Lucky Sutton, Geraldine Hawkins, defended the story in 2002, pointing out that Lucky Sutton never joked about the encounter and remained terrified by it until his dying day, which might mean that it's actually real. The event served as one of the earliest post 1947 accounts where strange entities and official interference intersected, making it a critical case for the history of ufology and the development of the Men in Black narrative. It also gave American culture the enduring phrase, little green people. From the Goblins in Kentucky in 1955 to Mothman in West Virginia in 1966, the Men in Black went from quasi-governmental to quasi-supernatural agents. The focus shifted from demanding silence about the Silver Goblins to a terrifying widespread campaign of psychological harassment from inhuman figures that seemed to embody a dark force known as Mothman. UFO investigator John Keel claimed that witnesses and researchers, including himself, were continually interrogated and threatened by strange men in black suits who seemed to anticipate events and possess odd, non-human qualities such as unnaturally pale skin and a rigid, almost mechanical way of speaking, which is a theme to this. Everywhere, all across the world, not just the US, but across the world, it's the way they speak that always trips people up. Keel's documentation expanded the MIB account to include bizarre vehicles, psychological harassment, and seeming inability to grasp common human customs. In his 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies, Keel not only investigated the creature sightings, but became an active participant in the unfolding drama, experiencing what he claimed were phantom phone calls, stolen evidence, and intimidation through eerie visitations. Keel's research meticulously documented 13 months of extreme high strangeness that gripped Point Pleasant, West Virginia, starting in late 1966 and ending with the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge in December 1967. Keel embedded himself in the community as an investigator and weaved together hundreds of events, including sightings of a quote-unquote Mothman, described as a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes, a multitude of UFO reports, bizarre animal mutilations, and electronic and psychic interferences. The first sighting of Mothman occurred on November 12, 1966, when either a crew of gravediggers or teenagers near disused munitions storage facilities reported seeing a large human-sized creature with glowing red eyes and enormous bat-like wings. Keel detailed how this intelligence manifested through the Men in Black, who he found were not just government agents, but supernatural actors exhibiting mechanical behaviors, inhuman language mistakes, and an unnatural ability to predict future disasters. These Men in Black asked bizarre questions, drove vehicles that appeared and disappeared without explanation, and displayed an unsettling ignorance of basic human customs, such as eating and social interaction. Keel's entire narrative builds on the case that the Men in Black, the Mothman, and other strange occurrences were all interconnected manifestations designed to confuse, harass, and prepare the collective consciousness for the ultimate catastrophe of the bridge failure that tragically claimed 46 lives on December 15th, 1967. However, journalist John C. Sherwood, a former business associate of Gray Barker, published an analysis in the May/June 2002 issue of Skeptical Inquirer of private letters between Keel and Barker during Keel's investigation. So Sherwood reported finding significant differences between what Keel wrote at the time of his investigation and what he wrote in his book, raising questions about the accuracy of the Mothman prophecies. Despite these concerns, Keel's work remains influential, and he is credited with popularizing the term Men in Black and establishing them as a permanent fixture in paranormal investigation. The Australian encounter in the 1970s confirmed the Mothman prophecy's quasi supernatural MIB figures. A crucial international example of the post-kill MIB phenomenon was found near Brisbane, Australia, in the early 1970s. This incident involved a family who had recently witnessed a UFO and found themselves the target of intense harassment by a single man in black figure. The witnesses' descriptions aligned perfectly with the odd earlier characteristics of the men in black. The man wore an ill-fitting black suit, drove an old-fashioned black car that seemed to be out of place in the rural setting, and most significantly, possessed an unsettling, almost wax-like complexion. Witnesses described his expression as dead and his voice as being monotone, fueling the speculation that these entities were androids, automatons, or biological entities struggling with terrestrial communications and human mannerisms. These Australian reports effectively stripped the Men in Black of its conventional government association and cast it as bizarre, physically flawed beings tied to the mysterious objects they sought to suppress. The Men in Black phenomenon, initially popularized by Gray Barker's documentation and confirmed by incidents in Australia, was quickly expanding all around the world. The Kaikoura Lights incident in New Zealand in 1978 provided an example of this spread following mass sightings of unexplained lights captured on film and tracked by radar. On December 21st, 1978, a series of UFO sightings occurred over the Kaikoura mountain ranges in New Zealand's South Island. The crew of a Safe Air Limited cargo aircraft, piloted by Captain Vern Powell and Ian Peary, began observing a series of strange lights around their plane, which followed them for several minutes before disappearing and then reappearing elsewhere. Which, when I first read about this, it made me think about the lights that were surrounding the Malaysia aircraft that disappeared. But these lights disappeared and reappeared, the aircraft did not. The UFO was giant and had 5 white flashing lights. The pilots described some of the lights as the size of a house and others as small but flashing brilliantly. These objects appeared not only visually but also on air traffic controllers' radar in Wellington and on the aircraft's onboard radar. Over a week later, on December 30th, 1978, an Australian television crew from Channel Zero, which is now Channel 10, recorded a similar event on film aboard a cargo aircraft flying between Wellington and Christchurch. Reporter Quentin Fogarty and cameraman David Crockett, along with the crew, filmed the UFOs while they were simultaneously tracked by Wellington Air Traffic Control and observed by multiple witnesses. So you can't say it's fake when you have all this recordings, you have air traffic control, you've got witnesses, you've got so many people. The objects followed the aircraft almost to its landing, and when the aircraft took off again, it was paced by an enormous orb-like object for 15 minutes. The resulting footage became renowned worldwide, with a CIA document noting that the Kaikoura sightings were, quote, unique among civilian UFO reports because there is a large amount of documentary evidence, which includes the recollections of 7 witnesses, 2 tape recordings made during the sightings, the detection of some unusual ground and airplane radar targets, and a 16 millimeter camera movie, end quote. So you can't deny this happened. After the extraordinary public nature of the UFO sightings, the pattern of intimidation began again, with witnesses and researchers claiming to be visited by dark-suited figures who seemed focused on monitoring their ongoing efforts and discouraging any public disclosure. These MIB were frequently associated with the vanishing act characteristic, driving large black vehicles that would appear and disappear without explanation on remote roads, suggesting their operation was somehow supernatural. The New Zealand Ministry of Defence, while unable to fully explain the filmed evidence, offered various explanations, including lights from squid boats reflected off clouds, unburnt meteors, or lights from the planet Venus, or trains and cars, though the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research report classified the objects as, quote, UFOs until identified, just meaning they're completely unidentified, and noted that, quote, prospect of extraterrestrial intervention being proved is regarded as extremely remote, end quote. Captain Bob Gard, one of the pilots involved, later stated, quote, "Would I tell anyone if I saw anything like this again? No, I wouldn't. It's not worth the hassle," end quote. Recalling the kind of intimidation and pressure that characterized Men in Black encounters even without direct visitation. Which these orbs really make me wonder, were they practicing? Like maybe they hadn't figured out how to make a plane disappear yet. And that's why we see them later on with Malaysia. I just can't get past the Malaysia connection here, which I did an episode on that, but I did not include the orbs because I had no idea about the orbs at the time. I'm going to do a whole new episode on the Malaysia flight, so you got to give me some time. But it just really, it keeps bringing me back to that. At the exact same time, in Uruguay and Argentina in the late 1970s, the renowned South American ufologist Fabio Zerpa spoke about numerous encounters with Los Hombres de Negro, or the Men of Black. Born in Uruguay in 1928, Zerpa moved to Argentina in 1951 and became one of the most prominent UFO researchers in South America. Following a successful career as an actor and theater director, he devoted himself to the study and dissemination of parapsychology and ufology disciplines, in which he became internationally recognized as one of the greatest specialists. In 1966, Zerpa created a radio program, Beyond the Fourth Dimension, and has since reported on more than 3,000 cases of UFO sightings and alleged contact with extraterrestrials. He founded a magazine dedicated to investigating the phenomenon and from 2001 directed the online magazine, The Fifth Man. Zerpa's work was so influential that he was named cultural ambassador of Colonia del Sacramento, Uruguay in December 2005. Zerpa published extensively on the Men in Black phenomenon, with his piece The Men in Black and UFOs in 1977, which was republished in Spain in 1978 and Argentina in 1989, and later The Real Men in Black in 1997. His research documented cases throughout South America, including a notable incident involving a woman in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and numerous other encounters across the continent. Witnesses in these countries consistently reported that these men spoke Spanish poorly and exhibited odd, robotic behavior as described in North American accounts. In his book UFO Dictionary, researcher Ruth Gerstel of the FAECE, which is the Argentine Federation of Extraterrestrial Sciences, although the abbreviation is actually for the Spanish version, defined Men in Black as, quote, presumed characters who usually approach witnesses of close UFO encounters and investigators of the phenomenon to intimidate or threaten them, so they do not speak about what they saw or investigated. They generally appear in groups of 3 and are dressed in black, hence their name, end quote. Although he says they usually appear in groups of 3, we have seen that in many of the stories that we've covered today, but there were 2 stories that we saw just one man show up. The repeated word errors and unfamiliarity with local customs and slang reinforce the core MIB theory of the non-local origin, suggesting they were not part of the national government apparatus, but rather agents, possibly non-human, struggling to mimic human social behavior and communication. Zerpa's documentation of these cases added a crucial international dimension to the Men in Black phenomenon, demonstrating that the pattern of visitation, language oddities, and mechanical behavior transcended cultural and geographic boundaries. Later in the United States, between the 1970s and 80s, as claims of alien abductions became more common, the MIB adapted their intimidation tactics, often appearing immediately after an alleged abduction event. Their purpose shifted slightly from securing debris to discouraging contactees, people who witnessed or experienced unexplainable events, from seeking therapy or public disclosure. This new focus introduced the chilling concept of medical and physical intrusion, where claims emerged of MIB appearing in hospital rooms or demanding witnesses hand over biological samples. This suggested the MIB's interest extended beyond simple technological cover-ups to the physical, biological evidence left on or in the contactees' bodies, which is terrifying. The phenomenon evolved to encompass not just intimidation about what witnesses had seen in the sky, but about what had allegedly happened to their physical bodies during abduction experiences, representing a more invasive and personally threatening dimension to the Men in Black phenomenon. The next tragic event occurred to Paul Benowitz in the 1970s in Arizona, where he became involved with the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, or APRO. In April 1979, his attention was drawn to a strange slew of cattle mutilations after attending a public meeting about it, which suggested that this was when the purported real Men in Black identified him and then targeted him for some form of participation. In the early 1980s, Benowitz escalated his involvement after he began intercepting what he believed were communications from alien spacecraft, which he traced to an origin near Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. Convinced he had definitive evidence of an extraterrestrial presence, he contacted the Air Force and quickly became part of a complex narrative. It is alleged that the Air Force officials and intelligence agents, the figures known as the Men in Black, did not simply dismiss Benowitz's claims. Instead, they reportedly encouraged him, actively feeding him false information about alien activities and technologies. This elaborate disinformation program was allegedly designed to discredit Benowitz and, crucially, prevent him from inadvertently uncovering sensitive military projects. The extreme psychological pressure resulting from this targeting and disinformation campaign caused Benowitz to suffer with his mental health for the rest of his life. His story serves as a pivotal example in UFO narratives of the alleged role of the Men in Black to silence or discredit individuals who claim to have had otherworldly encounters, thereby ensuring that the secrets of the unknown remain unexposed, whether through psychological manipulation or direct presence. Today, many people think of Men in Black as the Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones movie from 1997. The MIB in the movie is supposed to monitor and police the aliens who secretly live on Earth, maintain absolute secrecy from the humans by using advanced technology, mainly the memory erasing neuralizer device, and act as an interstellar immigration and regulatory service. The agents are known by their code names, which are essentially the first letters of their first names. They piece together clues with their alien pug Frank and chase down a cat named Orion for his collar that holds an entire galaxy in its pendant. Ultimately, they save the world from a giant alien cockroach. That's the first one. There's multiple movies after that. But the Men in Black conspiracy still lives on and is still terrifying people. A new documentary called The Age of Disclosure, directed by Dan Farah, strongly hints that the MIB agency is real. The film features high-ranking government officials who claim proof of extraterrestrial life has been covered up. The documentary's existence and the way it was made suggests a fear of being silenced. Farah kept everything about the documentary tightly under wraps, keeping participants' names secret so they would have safety in numbers until the film was completed. He stated the public was lied to, kept in the dark, completely misled by a heavily financed and very sophisticated disinformation campaign. This podcast is not sponsored by, nor do we make any money by endorsing the film, but if you do want to watch it, you can rent it or buy it on Amazon Prime Video if that's something that you're interested in. The former director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP, Luis Elizondo, claims he left his role because the department was, quote, hiding vital information and running a, quote, powerful disinformation campaign to discredit his work. He stated, quote, the government's efforts to conceal information about UAPs represents 80 years of lies and deceptions, end quote. A former defense official stated that those tasked with ensuring information about UAPs don't leak, quote, will use whatever tool they can find to try to convince people they shouldn't come forward, end quote. Another high-level government official and former head of the Pentagon's UAP task force, Jay Stratton, is quoted stating, I have personally seen non-human craft and non-human beings, end quote. Stratton speaks about a UAP report that came from the airspace around former President George W. Bush's ranch in Texas. He says when he traveled down to talk to the witnesses, they told him, quote, we cannot tell you what we saw because the OSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, came here and had us sign non-disclosure agreements. We did see something, but we can't talk to you about it, end quote. In fact, there are multiple retired U.S. Air Force Security Forces officers who speak about being given non-disclosure agreements that they were forced to sign and were told to never speak about what they witnessed. Bob Salas, a retired U.S. Air Force member who was on Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, said on record, quote, "Within the span of 8 days, we lost 20 nuclear missiles to UFOs," end quote. Which I've heard this. I've heard that one of the biggest things about UFOs is that they don't want nuclear war. We talked about this in the Valiant Thor episode as well. He came here to stop us from nuclear war. The current Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, said, quote, "We've had repeated instances of something operating in the airspace over restricted nuclear facilities, and it's not ours. And we don't know whose it is. That alone deserves inquiry, deserves attention, deserves focus," end quote. Quantum physicist and chief PhD scientist for the UAP task force, Hal Puthoff, said that he was part of many government programs that had gone undisclosed. He says people don't think that many people in government can keep a secret, but that, quote, "programs can be kept secret. Usually it's just out of a personal need to protect oneself," end quote. Throughout the documentary, several individuals talk about information being on a need-to-know basis only. Records indicate that even presidents are not given access to this information, including former President George H.W. Bush, who had repeatedly been told he did not have a need to know about a UAP crash retrieval. According to Elizondo, 99.9% of American scientists cannot make progress of crash retrieval material or UAP information because of the powerful disinformation that has caused stigma around people who believe in aliens. Therefore, progress cannot be made because most scientists don't even believe that it's real. The documentary goes into detail about how the legacy program that is part of the CIA controls this information that dates back to the mid-1940s. Right when we start hearing about the Men in Black and right when most of the UFO sightings pick up. Several officials confirmed the validity of the Roswell UAP crash incident, detailing that 4 non-human bodies were recovered and the aircraft had hieroglyphic markings on the outside of it. According to Puthoff, there are several different types of extraterrestrial species that have been identified. Again, I covered this in the Hangar 18 episode because that's where they ended up taking the bodies. They say that information and technology that is discovered from extraterrestrials is often put into contractor files that are very difficult to access through the Freedom of Information Act. But because of this, when people are no longer in their positions in government, the next person to replace them may not know the project was taking place with a contractor, and eventually the contractor has information and continues working on it as their own without crediting where the technology actually came from. Secretary Rubio said something super fascinating, that there is major technological innovation that has been derived from extraterrestrial reverse engineering, and corporations that were contracted by the government are selling products to the public that were created out of these forgotten programs. The information from the documentary, along with many accounts around the world about men coming to gather information and intimidate people who have witnessed alien activity, suggests that the Men in Black theory may not be just a theory at all. Also, just in case anyone was thinking Orion's Belt universe pendant in the Men in Black movie was all made up, on November 17th, 2025, so last month, an article was published in UIC Today, a science education journal, announcing that CERN managed to recreate the Big Bang, creating an entire universe within its 17-mile long accelerator ring. However, it only existed for a fraction of a second, but they did it. And it is super creepy that they can. Like, what are they doing at CERN? I have so many more questions. So tell me, what do you guys think? Is the Men in Black theory just a bunch of made-up conspiracies, or do you think the Legacy program or some other agency is out there silencing anyone who has concrete information about aliens? Let me know in the comments, and of course, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast written, hosted, and produced by me, Danny Mercy. Special thanks to Lindsay for research and writing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at rabbit.holepodcast and visit our website at stayskeptical.com for everything else.